Hi, George Rogers with Choice Skills, your host on the Choice Skills Show. Welcome to today's presentation where we're going to be talking about the nature of money. It was Timothy in the New Testament who said that the love of money is the root of all evil, and that many by coveting it pierce themselves through with many sorrows. Well, as things are in today's world, money is a necessary evil. And so one of the most important things we can do for our children in teaching them at homeschool or teaching them in public schools or just as parents in teaching our children is to help them understand the nature of money. And that's going to be our presentation today.
If I were to ask you how much money is worth, you might be hard put to come up with an answer that I could understand. The reason is that answer is very individual for each person. Money is simply a medium of exchange, and what it's worth is determined by what we are willing to give for it and what we are willing to spend it on. The answer to that question is answered by each of us individually. It determines how much time we're willing to invest in earning money, how much labor we're willing to invest, how much talent we have to bring to the table, and in some cases, how much integrity are we willing to sacrifice to obtain money. For example, the amount of knowledge or skills that you bring to the table determine to a large extent how much time you have to spend to earn a given amount of money. Then the only question is how much time are you willing to spend? The next important part of the equation is what do you want the money for? What do you want to spend it on? Is it for food and housing and clothing, or for transportation, a bicycle or a car, for work or for pleasure, or is it just for pleasure, for a vacation or something? What is it we're working for here? What do we want the money for? Adam Smith, a Scottish philosopher in the 1700s, in his book titled Wealth of Nations, postulated that while we all have unlimited wants, we have limited resources, and that thereby we are required to prioritize what we want or what we actually try to get. And so money, in this sense, what it's worth to us is what we choose to spend it on, and that's in relationship to every other thing we could spend it on. For example, what we're willing to spend $1 on may vary a whole lot between whether we have $100 or $1 million. I remember an occasion earlier in my life when we were fairly low on funds and I needed a white shirt. So I went shopping and I was able to find one for a couple dollars. And interestingly enough, I had occasion to visit with a working colleague at the time, and he had on a white shirt that was worth $25. And I looked at the two shirts and I decided I couldn't tell the difference. And so it all depends on how we were willing to spend. He was willing to spend the $25, I wasn't, but I was willing to come up with something close to that for much less. In my case, I was required to do some shopping around to find what I wanted. In his case, it wasn't necessary, so he didn't spend the time shopping around for what he wanted. I've also known individuals who buying drugs was a greater priority than buying food, and so if they didn't have enough for both, they would spend their money on drugs and not on food. Another trade-off might be education versus pleasure. For example, one might spend the money on a vacation, while another one might spend the money on education. And so, again, it comes back to personal choices and what's important to us. Another illustration of what money is worth that I think kind of gets at this very graphically. If you were a man with a bag of money, dying of thirst on the desert, you might easily be willing to trade that bag of money for a cup of water. Money can buy a lot of things. But interestingly, the one thing money cannot buy is happiness. We're all familiar with people who have enormous wealth and live very unhappy lives. True, money can make life more convenient for us. It can make many things easier for us, but it cannot buy happiness. Unfortunately, to purchase happiness is one of the things that people seek money to obtain. And yet, it can't be had. And so many are, as Timothy suggests, pierced through with many sorrows. Benjamin Franklin expressed it this way: I conceive that a great part of the miseries of mankind are brought upon them by the false estimates they have made of the value of things, and by their giving too much for their whistles. We've talked today about some of the ways in which people can spend too much for their whistles, In our next episode of the Choice Skills Show, we want to explore the nature of debt, because in many cases going into great debt is one of the ways in which people pay too much for their whistles. So join me for our next episode when we'll be talking about the nature of debt.